From a defabricated garden shed in Rockland County, New York, USA, this is Stand Up with Pete Dominic. On today's episode, tips on keeping up appearances on the bicycle when you can barely squeeze into that spandex. And now, the podcast host who has no use for spandex because he prefers hand-woven flannel, Pete Dominic!
Yes, I love hand-woven flannel. I don't go anywhere without it, as a matter of fact. My bed sheets, my pants, my shirts, everything is hand-woven flannel. Thank you, Pico. Thank you for pressing play on today's podcast. You will not regret it because I have two great conversations with two excellent experts who you've grown to trust, respect over the years. The great Dr. Aaron Carroll joins me at about 14 minutes if you want to skip ahead. That's first. Awesome conversation with Aaron. Then after that, I catch up with former federal prosecutor Glenn Kirschner. Go over all the big legal dramas coming out of Washington, D.C. And that starts about 37 minutes in. Two great guests on today's episode of Stand Up. I cannot do it without your support. Thank you to the new subscribers as well as those who've been subscribing for a long time and just decided to up their subscription for whatever reason. You can do that. Always love to see that come through. Shows that you're supporting the show in every way that you can, and I can't do it without you. So thank you very, very much. Working really hard to bring you real smart conversations that help enlighten, inform, maybe inspire, laugh a little bit, get you through the day each and every day. At least every weekday here on Stand Up. If you are a subscriber, you'll get an email every day with a nature photo that must include no human-made, no man-made objects in the photo. Vitamin N, as it's called by my friend Rich Louv, the great nature writer. You'll get that photo every day, and I like to think that it's a good email to open to start your day. And, of course, press play here on Stand Up, where, again, two great guests joining me, Dr. Aaron Carroll, Glenn Kirschner, both coming up. A quick news update from yesterday. I feel like the big story was the one about China, their first population drop in 6 decades. That was covered by pretty much every major media outlet. China's population fell last year for the first time in 6 decades, a historic turn that is expected to mark the start of a long period of decline in its citizen numbers, with profound implications for its economy and the world. First decline in their population since 1961, the last year of China's Great Famine. And now apparently this makes India the world's most populous nation now. India potentially overtaking China. UN experts predicted last year that India would have a population of 1.412 billion in 2022, though they did not expect the South Asian nation to overtake China until this year. I think the fallout over that story is going to be really important to analyze and understand, and I'm going to try to read more about it and talk to experts about it. If you've got ideas of who to talk about that one, always love to hear from you. Probably should get back in touch with Pete Coe's in-law, that Dexter Roberts, The Myth of Chinese Capitalism, author of that book. Talked to him a while back. Very important story. That's why I mentioned it. I mention stories that are important and impactful to large groups of people, not the sensational murder stories like the one coming out of the rich white family. Terrible story out of Massachusetts. A guy apparently allegedly killed his wife. It's everywhere. I'm not talking about that. You can go find that on your own. I'm not talking about plane crashes. I'm not talking about things, random acts of violence or celebrity gossip. You don't hear me mention anything about Jeremy Renner, the actor. He hurt his leg because he owns a giant snowplow and apparently it ran over him. I don't know. I'm not covering all the details about that or any of the rest of the pop culture nonsense that we're distracted by and improperly measuring our own lives by so often. No, I'm talking about the issues that I think matter or probably should matter to most people most of the time. So always want to hear from you and what you think they are. Standupwithpete@gmail.com if you've got ideas. Okay, all right, I'm done ranting. I just like to just let people know there's always new listeners. Just want to redefine and let you know what I'm trying to do here every day on this podcast. Another big story that got a lot of attention yesterday is that the Davos World Economic Forum is happening right now, and it's a pretty ridiculous gathering of people. I mean, I used to go to the Aspen Ideas Festival every year, but that was much different. We broadcast from there and so on. Anyway, Kirsten Sinema, the now independent senator, was asked at Davos about leaving the Democratic Party, and she criticized Democrats for trying to change filibuster rules and pass voting rights legislation. And she also called Kevin McCarthy a, quote, dear friend of mine. I want to play you 2 minutes of Kirsten Sinema yesterday, where she takes credit basically for blocking the reinstatement of the landmark Voting Rights Restoration Act, the Voting Rights Bill. I mean, she really does take credit for it. The day after Dr. Martin Luther King Day, she basically says she and Manchin, who's also at Davos, did a good thing in blocking a bill that would basically reinstate Dr. King's landmark achievement, the 1965 Voting Rights Act, and prevent partisan gerrymandering. Something, by the way, that the entire United States Senate reconfirmed every few years, the Voting Rights Act, unanimously. Nope, but this is what she calls radical now, that because there wasn't a majority of senators, because so many Republicans now would vote against that after the Supreme Court ripped voting rights away. The whole thing is so absurd. If you know the history of it, it's just absolutely egregious what she did, but somehow she positions herself as the savior, the moderate in this case. Oh, and she calls Kevin McCarthy her dear friend. So I don't know which one of them is more of a hollow human being, but here is Senator Kirsten Sinema at Davos with that explanation.
Senator Cruz, since last time we met, you become an independent.
That's correct.
Happened that same day or the day after, didn't it?
So, as folks know, I have formally declared my independence from what I consider to be a deeply broken two-party system. Those who know me know that I was always an independent voice and always have been for the things that I believe in and for my state and for my country. But I do think it's important to note that what you've heard about partisanship, I believe, is accurate. You know, in the last 2 years, if we think, you know, January 6th, which is a horrible day from 2 years ago, created, I think, concern and fear for every patriotic American across the country. But in the resulting 2 years, the Democratic Party shared a narrative that said we would not have any more free and fair elections in this country if the United States Congress didn't eliminate the filibuster and pass a massive voting rights package. As we all know, the filibuster was not eliminated. Joe and I were not interested in sacrificing that important guardrail for the institution. That massive voting rights bill was not passed through Congress. And then we had a free and fair election all across the country. And as has been noted, the outcome of that election was different than many people expected. Most election deniers lost across the country, and individuals of both political parties, some extreme, some moderate, won. So we had a free and fair election. So one could posit that the push by one political party to eliminate an important guardrail in an institution in our country may have been premature or overreaching in order to get the short-term victories they wanted. Then we fast forward to where we are today, and we saw the House of Representatives struggle for multiple days in a row as Kevin McCarthy, dear friend of mine, had to continue conceding point after point after point to the radical right of the GOP, to a point where he's now in an unenviable position that will make it very difficult for us to meet our obligation when the debt limit fight comes up later this year. Those are just two examples of the pull that you see political parties giving in order to get everything they want.
Oh, don't you wish there was some kind of pushback at some point? Don't you wish you would sit down with a journalist who would call her out on all of that nonsense and bullshit? David Lurie writes on Twitter, Sinema may be a one-term senator, but she will always be remembered for standing up against voting rights. All right, we go from there over to CNN, where Jake Tapper had the former governor of Maryland, who a lot of people are talking about. I think he's considering looking at a run for the Republican nomination for president. I don't think he's got any kind of chance of getting it, but it'll certainly help him raise some money, get his name recognition for something else potentially. Anyway, here's Larry Hogan. He's asked by Jake Tapper about Ron DeSantis. Hogan takes him down.
Governor Ron DeSantis is often cited by conservative Republicans as somebody they might want to see run for president. You've called him an important voice, one of the important voices for the party. Do you think he would be good at what you're talking about in terms of reaching out to people in the middle?
Well, he hasn't done it so far. I mean, he's done a really good job of getting on Fox News, and he's capturing a lot of attention. But he certainly hasn't done it the way Charlie Baker and Phil Scott and I have. We're consistently the most highest job approval in the country, and I think DeSantis is down around 30th place among governors.
Is that because he's too focused on the base, too focused on red meat issues?
Well, I just think that he is focused on the base, and he's doing pretty well with the base. But he's going to have to figure out a way, if he wants to have a political future beyond Florida, to appeal to a broader audience.
Oh, Larry Hogan taking a deep cut at Ron DeSantis early in the nomination fight. Will DeSantis even win? You know it's going to be Pompeo, folks. I'm telling you. All right, there's just a couple of sound bites for you from yesterday. And finally, here is WTF just happened today in one sentence. I love this daily email from Matt Visor. It's day 728 of the Biden presidency, and there are 658 days until the presidential election. And Matt Visor, in Today in One Sentence, wrote, I thought this is a good recap. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen notified Congress that the U.S. will hit the debt ceiling Thursday. Biden's aides found 5 additional pages of classified material at his personal residence in Delaware. House Republicans demanded 2 years of visitor logs from Biden's Delaware home and all other information related to the recently discovered classified documents. A failed Republican candidate for the New Mexico House was arrested for orchestrating a series of shootings targeting Democratic state officials. And Marjorie Taylor Greene and Paul Gosar received committee assignments after being removed from their committees in 2021 over violent social media posts. Good job with that. All in one sentence from WTF Just Happened Today daily email newsletter. Apparently, according to Daily Beast, Marjorie Taylor Greene and Lauren Boebert got in a fight in the bathroom. And Democrat Congresswoman Dingell was asked about it. She was in the bathroom and she said whatever happens in the women's room stays in the women's room, which is classy because she's a Democrat. She could have trashed those two ladies, but she didn't. President Biden will deliver the State of the Union on February 7th. This week, he's going to head out to California to see about the damage with these atmospheric rivers. How are you guys doing out there in California, by the way? California listeners, check in, pop me an email, or get in touch with me some way. I'd like to hear from you. All right. Well, that's all I've got for the news segment. Let's get to my guests, shall we? That's why you're here. That's the strength of the show, is telling new intern Odessa. The strength of the show is the amazing guests that I get on the show and what I like to think are pretty well done, well prepared interviews, asking good questions, important questions to the smartest people I can find. And folks, joining me now is probably the smartest guy in the world, according to me. I don't know how things are measured this way, but whether it be emotional intelligence and vulnerability or academic intelligence, his ability to recall statistics, ideas, experiences, policies, laws, and of course, research, he's simply the best, if you ask me. Dr. Aaron Carroll is back. It's been far too long. He's a regular contributor to the New York Times now. He's got a award-winning hit YouTube channel called Healthcare Triage, which you should definitely check out and subscribe to. Of course, follow him on all the social medias. Let him know that you heard him here on the show and that you're glad that he's back. He'll see that and he'll appreciate it for sure. Ladies and gentlemen, lots to discuss with the great Dr. Aaron Carroll. And hell, why not play the classic jingle? A collaboration between two very talented listeners, Gareth Sever and Pete Coe, putting this together.
Paging Dr. Carroll. Paging Dr. Carroll.
Aaron Carroll. He's Karen, and he shares it all. Aaron Carroll. He's blaring it out and bears it all.
He knows modern medicine, dispels disinformation. He's a brilliant pediatrician. All that and then some. Aaron Carroll. He's the IUCHO, does HSR, writes NYTO, and puts out HC
Paging Dr. Carroll. Dr. Carroll to the studio.
And action. There he is, Dr. Aaron Carroll in his office, surrounded by books, probably some of which he wrote. And that's my first question. Does the Bad Food Bible hold up?
Yeah. I take nothing back. Nothing that's come out since then, I think, would contradict most of what I said in there. In fact, all of it. I don't know of anything that I would take back.
Yeah, because I was thinking about just in terms of, you've taught us this before, how new studies, new research comes out, and sometimes it changes things, but this is mostly about diet and nutrition and debunking myths. And so nothing new is changed you on meat or eggs or salt or sugar or fat or anything.
No, I think, most of the research that's come out since is in support of it. But so much of the book is talking about, you got to talk about holistically all the research. You can't just cherry pick a study. So most of the things that I talk about have a fairly large amount of research behind them. So new studies that come out aren't changing it. If we really want to change, what we know about nutrition and eating, we got to start engaging in some large scale prospective trials, and stop doing just the same kind of observational studies that we've done to death. So until we start doing those kinds of things, we're not going to have really any new information.
I didn't realize that was what was preventing us from having more insight, more data. What would that look like? A study on what would that look like? Why don't we do that type of a study?
Because it's so hard to do. Trying to get people to stick to a diet for 6 weeks is difficult. Imagine the difficulty of trying to randomize people to different diets for years in order to see long-term outcomes. It'd be borderline impossible because you can't blind it either, nor can you get people to stick to it. So a lot of it has to do with it's just incredibly difficult to do. The other thing is that what would we study? So many people have differing opinions on different nutrients. Do we eliminate a single nutrient and try to study that? Do we do whole different diets and try to do that? And there's so many individual variables that account for health as well that, diet is just a contributing factor. So it's going to be difficult. Part of, I think, what the book tries to get to is that we got to stop thinking about food as really, miracle medicine. That's just not what food is. You want to try to eat a healthy diet and get the fuel that you need to live without going too far. That's about as good as you can get in trying to, I think, really radically change things. Certainly, if you're overeating or undereating, you need to fix those things. But trying to drastically change things in order to achieve really large health outcomes is incredibly difficult, if not impossible.
I feel like one thing that's really taken off, and I know your thoughts on diets, we've talked about all of this before, the psychology behind it, the ridiculousness of all of it. But we've you've, I think, even done videos, intermittent fasting, the idea that you don't eat until dinner or something. Is that,
No, it's funny because it works as well as any other diet. As long as you can stick to it and it changes your eating habits to make them more healthy, it's better. But, perhaps the best study done on it was done by someone who was a pretty big proponent of intermittent fasting, and the results showed it didn't really do better. And he owned it. There was a great Twitter thread, if I remember correctly, where he talked about it. That he really believed it, but they did the actual randomized controlled trial, and it didn't do anything different than other diets. I don't mean to say it won't work. It may work for you, but a diet is as good as you can stick to it, and that it changes your habits towards healthier eating. There is no magic diet that works for everyone and fails for no one. And intermittent fasting is no better or worse probably than any other.
And what did I read about? You just did an interview with talking to somebody, some outlet, or was it a school, about dry January or quitting drinking?
Oh, yes. It's some public health magazine from Harvard. Yeah, they wanted to talk about, they sort of wanted to talk about in the context of dry January and the fact that drinking went up during the pandemic. Did I have any changes in my thoughts about alcohol? And the gist of it was the answer is no. I don't think drinking in and of itself, if properly maintained at a healthy level, is bad. But I do think that drinking too much is terrible. Nothing has changed with respect to that. But we also talked about dry January, and I was talking about, I'm probably trying to do a drier January, but I don't really do abstention. I don't believe in taking things away entirely cold turkey, anything. Moderation is my sort of go-to.
When you say you don't believe in it, it's partly based on research and partly based on the pragmatism of life and I think you've talked about this before, but having joy in your life and not punishing yourself by not having a thing.
Everybody seems to think the only way you can get gains in the new year is to completely deprive and punish yourself. That unless you're sacrificing on some kind of altar, you can't achieve noticeable health gain. In fact, I just pitched a piece like this in the New York Times where, drink less, which is what I'm doing. Like I said for January, I'm really only going to drink when I either go out or a special occasion instead of, a couple times a week, having a cocktail night at home. So it's less. Is it none? No. Like we went out for Jacob's birthday. He was 21. I had a drink with him. We went out for Noah's birthday to a place that I know is a great bourbon list. I had I tried some. But I'm drinking less. And so like that, it's a change to see how it goes. Maybe it'll show me that, I could do by with less, but I don't want to go to zero. I get joy out of that. And I don't believe that the research shows that occasional drinking like that is dangerous in the sense that it has a noticeable and large health, outcome if you were to change that. I do believe, again, if you're drinking too much, if you are abusing or, having, really drinking what we would consider to be too much, that can be very unhealthy. I'm not advocating for that. But I think that when people get to like the only amount of alcohol is zero alcohol, that's not necessarily true. And it deprives people of a fair amount of secondary gain or other gains that they might be getting by doing whatever it is. For some people, it's joy. For some people, it's celebrating. And that matters. And so and that goes for food as well. I just don't think that you have to always go to punishing. You can try to do a little bit better, and that can often make a big difference.
Let's talk about COVID, shall we?
Sure. Well, sure.
I mean, COVID and vaccines. Is
that COVID still out there? Where do you live? No, I'm joking.
Yeah, well, it's the third leading cause of death in America, headed into the third year of the pandemic. Is that right?
Is it still the third leading cause? I don't know. I would have to look up the numbers.
I read that a couple of weeks ago at a couple of what I thought were reputable outlets. But the point is,
it's still there. I didn't mean to make light. It is still there. It is still causing a significant amount of death. But it's approaching levels of, bad respiratory virus. It's not like it was 2020, 2021, where it was like, where it was, up there with cancer and or heart disease. I don't think the numbers are still up there, but I could be a little bit behind.
How much of it has to do with the treatment of it, that they know how to treat it better if you weren't vaccinated?
Yeah, some, but I'd say probably the vast majority of the lowering death that we're seeing is because of immunity. The vast majority of Americans at this point have some immunity to this virus, either through multiple doses of vaccine, we hope, or through getting COVID. The problem that we saw in 2020 was that we had a massively infectious, pretty dangerous disease for which we had like no natural immunity. And we hadn't seen anything like that since the pandemic of flu about a century ago. Other epidemics we've seen, other flus, we have some, immunity to flu. We also have vaccines. And when you see things like SARS or MERS, they weren't as transmissible. And so we just didn't have them spread, and we were able to contain, if not eradicate them. So COVID was different. But at this point, there's a lot more immunity out there in America than there was. That doesn't mean it's safe. It doesn't mean that immunocompromised people aren't still at risk. Doesn't mean that, elderly people aren't still at risk. It's just not the same level of danger that it was in 2020.
What about the issue regarding vaccines in general? How concerned are you about the damage that's been done and the kind of public conversation around them? I mean, when we started talking years ago, this was an issue. I was talking to Peter Hotez about it over 10 years ago, I think, as well. It was the anti-vax movement has been around for a long time, but how do you see how do you kind of gauge the momentum of people's hesitations on the vaccination? And now, by the way, every time someone dies, it's because of the vaccine, like from football to, Lisa Marie Presley. Any person that you hear died and you don't know the cause of death straight away, by the way, the football player didn't die, I should say.
So while I hate all the arguments and the false information about vaccines, I just take a longer view of this. It's always been bad.
Yeah.
Since vaccines were created, there have been vaccine deniers and people who would make a misinformation. They often came from the medical community. You can find in fact, we did a healthcare triage series on vaccination a couple of years ago, and 2 of them were directly about anti-vaccination movement. I mean, it goes back hundreds, if not more years. There was a period of time during, when MMR was really in people's crosshairs, that anytime a child got autism, we said it was MMR. Anytime a child had a bad outcome, we said it was MMR. Lots of stuff that had nothing to do with autism was called autism, and they blamed it on the MMR. So this is sort of where we are. We beg people for a long time. I wrote columns every year long before COVID begging people to get a flu shot, and people would scream and yell and say it caused damage or this or that. And we can never get America up much beyond 50, 60%. We still have tons of people who are not vaccinated against HPV, young adults. And we had presidential elections, 2, 3 elections ago where there were candidates saying like the HPV vaccine killed people. So this isn't new. It's just, of course, bigger because we have a disease and a vaccine which was in the news every single day, which means that this stuff comes to the forefront. But these are battles we have fought for a long, long time, and we will continue to fight them in the future.
What about a vaccine for all the variants? Is that going to be a universal vaccine? Do you see that coming?
No, I don't. Theoretically, it could. Part of the problem is that this virus is pretty good at changing itself to get around our immune systems. And it also is happening incredibly fast. So every year for flu, for instance, at the beginning of the year, scientists look towards the southern hemisphere. They try to figure out which flu strains seem to be predominant that year. They make a best guess. We create vaccines. We immunize people in America in, August, September, October. We hope we've gotten it right. Some years we nail it. Some years we get close. Some years it's not so good. But it always does something. It's just not always amazing. The first COVID vaccines were amazing. But then variants started popping up, and granted the vaccines still work, but the variants are changing so quickly that, again, it's like, I remember like Thanksgiving of 2021, it was like the first time we heard about Omicron. And then like a month and a half later, it was everywhere in America. Same thing's happening now. The variant that we're seeing in America now, we never even heard of, a couple weeks ago. You can't make a vaccine that fast. So trying to create a vaccine for something that's happening and changing every few months, no, I don't think we're going to do that. Now, maybe they'll find a very stable part of the virus that they could try to make a vaccine on that wouldn't change so often. But got to be honest with you, I'm just not seeing a lot of interest in dumping tons and tons and tons of money into COVID anymore. We got those vaccines because the United States and other countries, but we made massive investments in saying, we don't care about the cost, make a miracle. That kind of thinking seems to be gone. Congress doesn't seem to have any will for spending like we used to. I don't think we're going to see the major advances that we will see. And when you look at the new boosters, which are more, the bivalent ones, there are serious arguments to be made about whether or not they're really that much better than the original vaccines, which are still great. So it's not that I don't think we could. I just don't think we have the appetite for the massive level of spending anymore.
Let me ask you real quick about your recent healthcare triage YouTube video, the popular YouTube channel Healthcare Triage. It's Does Cold Weather Cause Cold? Everybody should go watch it. I just shared it. And in the comments, Dave, @Dave_Anna, I don't know who he is. He says, oh, Lord, this again? Cold weather itself does not cause a cold, but go outside when the weather's very cold. You'll find yourself with a slightly runny nose. Not a cold, but you're much more likely to touch your nose. Touching your nose, sir, is the problem. I didn't see you address Dave's point.
Well, but why? Well, touching your nose, I guess, would be a problem if you didn't wash your hands. But if you're touching your nose, usually is going to get germs from your nose onto your hands. Now, it can go the other way around. Wash your hands. But why are you touching your nose if it's runny? I mean, you could blow your nose, but that still would be with the tissue, I imagine. Don't touch your nose. Like, if you don't want to spread germs, don't touch your face. Don't touch your nose as much as you can, but wash your hands. But again, you're then coming up with reasons why why some viruses may be more predominant in cold weather. And I don't deny that that's the case. Flu, COVID, these things always get worse in the winter. The question is why. You have a theory there that it's because people touch their nose and touch other people. Maybe. Could be because we spend lots more time inside around other people and not outside where it's harder to transmit those viruses. Maybe. It may be because of something I'm not saying. I don't know. But it's not because of the cold weather. And when people are like, don't go outside, it's really cold, or make sure you put on a really good coat because you'll get a cold if you're cold. Like, no, that's, there are a lot of people that say that. Maybe you know the difference, but there are a lot of people who still believe that. It's just not true.
All right. Finally, I got to ask you about your most, I think, recent New York Times opinion guest essay, which was posted at the end of the year. It's really important. Blue states want red states to face consequences, but travel bans are harmful. This is in reference to this last year. Georgia passed a law that allowed the barring of transgender girls from participating in girls' sports. And you write, this was a devastating blow for transgender people across the country, as yet another state made it clear that they would be considered different. In response, California banned all state-funded travel to Georgia. With the addition of Georgia, 23 states are now subject to AB 1887, to the 2016 California statute that prohibits state-sponsored travel to states with laws that discriminate against LGBTQ people. What's wrong with this?
Well, I mean, the thing that's got me writing this is I met an assistant professor who at one of the California universities who was telling me that he couldn't do research anymore on African-American gay males who were living in Louisiana. And that had been his things. He was doing qualitative ethnographic research of what it's like to be Black and gay in predominantly Black cities. Now, more than half of African Americans in the United States live in the South. Now he can't travel to do that research anymore. And I was like, well, that seems to defeat the purpose of what you're trying to do. It's like you're trying to pass a law in California to support, all kinds of LGBTQ people in the United States, but then you're preventing LGBTQ people from doing research on LGBTQ people in the states where they live, where they might be affected. And, extrapolating this out, it's like if you start banning people from traveling anywhere where they're passing laws that you don't like, how will we know the effect of abortion bans if we can't do research in the states that ban abortion? And I get why they want to punish those states, but I think it's important to remember that lots of LGBTQ people live in those states. Lots of people you might want to protect live in those states. They're not monoliths of, people who just don't agree with you. A lot of these laws passed by squeakers because the states are gerrymandered, and, cutting them off and not traveling so that you can't do research is not probably the outcome you're looking for. Moreover, it's hurting the careers of lots, and this is not as important to everybody, but it's still important. It hurts the careers of lots of junior faculty who live in places like California. I mean, you can't travel to a meeting if it's in Indiana. You can't travel to a meeting if it's in Florida. Lots of these things happen. You can say, well, the meeting should change. Well, great. It's really privileged to say you can command where a meeting would be. Lots of people can't, and it takes time to make these kinds of changes. I have no problem if people choose not to go to states. Like if you don't feel safe in Louisiana and you don't want to travel there, you should not be forced to. But being banned from using your funds to travel there when it's in your interest seems like it might not necessarily be there. And, just more globally, it just too often feels like we're willing to cut off all people who live in places who pass laws we don't agree with, even though, again, those are not just homogenous places. Right. Half of African Americans live in the South. Cutting off the South doesn't just cut off people who discriminate against African Americans. It cuts off all of those African Americans too. And that's just one example.
That's why, that's what I say to people that live in Ohio. Like, you didn't ask to be born there. It's where you were born. It's not your fault. You're born in Ohio. It's a shitty state, but what are you going to do?
Well, it's also just like, so not everyone has the kind, like you can say to me, you leave Indiana. And okay, fine. I can afford to leave Indiana. Not everyone has that kind of, economic mobility.
Right. Opportunity, family. I just wanted to really.
That's a very facetious. Ohio. Yeah, that's a really weird thing to say. And that if a law gets passed of that, absolutely you should just be able to pick up. Some people can do that. Lots of people can't.
Right.
And they deserve good lives too.
All right, Dr. Aaron Carroll, we thank you very much for your time here today and taking all these questions, and look forward to doing it very soon again and getting more updates on your Lego projects, which seems like all you're tweeting about these days. I wish...
Yeah, it's about all I feel like tweeting about. So yes, that's almost true.
Can you just send me things that you wish you could tweet but can't, and then I can say them?
I probably could. Yeah,
let's get that going.
I also tweeted, I think, about God of War Ragnarok. Phenomenal game.
Oh, video game. Yeah, I got confused about that. I thought you were talking about a movie. I was like, wait, what? And you clearly stated...
I didn't think any game could ever be better than God of War, but its sequel I think is better.
And your game system, of course, is the PS5 still. You're a PS5.
For that, yes. I also, we enjoy our Switch quite a bit as well.
Oh. But do you watch videos of other people playing video games?
When I'm done the game, yes, I will. But I don't do it before then.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Best TV show you're watching, then I'll let you go.
I just watched Wednesday. I enjoyed it much more than I thought I would on Netflix. Sydney made me watch it.
Wednesday?
Yeah, it's about like Wednesday Addams. It's a new take. It was actually pretty good.
Oh, all right. Never heard of it.
Enjoy it.
Thank you.
I know.
Okay, sir. We really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Talk to you later.
There he goes, Dr. Aaron Carroll. Get his book, subscribe to his YouTube channel, Healthcare Triage, and support him on Patreon if you want. Always great catching up with Dr. Carroll. Follow him on Twitter, although he's not very active there much anymore. Anyway, say hi. He'll see your mention on Twitter, and he will, I'm sure, appreciate it. I certainly will. Whenever you let listener guests know that you heard him on the show, it always matters a lot, including with my next guest, who is a monster. He's huge. He's got a huge following now on YouTube, on Twitter, on cable news, everywhere. He is a former federal prosecutor, former U.S. Army prosecutor, NBC News legal analyst. Check out his YouTube channel and subscribe if you haven't already. YouTube.com/Glenn Kirschner2. Glenn Kirschner2 on Twitter. It's time for the Kirschner Report. Justice matters with Glenn Kirschner. You were in court today? You were watching some trials? You had some Proud Boys, some Oath Keeper action? What was going on? What is going on? How many more of these guys are being brought up on charges from January 6th?
Yeah, so I was in federal district court in Washington today watching some of my friends and former colleagues prosecute the Proud Boys case, and also the second Oath Keepers case is up and running. And, I couldn't help but feel like I wouldn't be sitting in court watching these trials. None of this would be going on if Donald Trump hadn't said, come to D.C. on January 6th, we'll be wild, fight like hell or you won't have a country anymore. Now go to the Capitol and stop the steal. And it's so funny because on the lunch break, I was talking to my friend Kyle Cheney of Politico, and we were discussing this precise thing. And we were talking about how the federal judges have been virtually screaming from the rooftops that Donald Trump is responsible for the insurrection. And you would think that would make the Department of Justice, I don't know, maybe accelerate its time frame and bring a charge against this mope already. And then I come home and I see a tweet from Kyle Cheney that another federal judge just issued an opinion about how Donald Trump is responsible for the insurrection. And here it is. I just printed it out, hot off the presses today from Judge Colleen Kolar-Catelli, a terrific federal judge in D.C. And she said in her opinion, among other things, she was trying as the finder of fact. It wasn't a jury trial. The judge was the finder of fact. Sometimes you can try a case to a judge instead of a jury. And she convicted this defendant of participating in the insurrection. And she said in the opinion things like, at the Stop the Steal rally, then President Trump exhorted his supporters to, in fact, stop the steal by marching to the Capitol. The defendant marched to the Capitol, having followed then President Trump's instructions. And I mean, I urge people to read this. It's an 18-page opinion. You're going to say something, Pete?
Yeah, why does she... first of all, I didn't know you could have a trial like that without a jury. But why does she, and why do other judges, as you're saying, screaming from the rooftop, include that in their opinion, quote, followed President Trump's instructions? Why is that so important?
Because it's relevant evidence to this defendant's guilt, that is what motivated her, this is a female defendant, that's what motivated her to try to stop the certification of Joe Biden's election win. She was following the orders of Donald Trump, and the judge expressly found that. And then she ends by convicting the defendant, whose name is Deneen McAndrew, of all 4 charges. And she said, that the defendant heeded the call of former President Trump and continued onward through all the barriers, through all the do not enter signs, through all of the tear gas, through the broken doors of the Capitol to stop the steal. So, here we have judge after judge after judge. And let me just say, these were 4 misdemeanor charges. Misdemeanors are often tried to a judge and not a jury. Felony charges are usually tried to a jury. That's why a judge was sitting as the finder of fact in this case.
Federal judge finds January 6th defendant followed president's instructions. That's one headline that I'm reading. Who is this lady? She's like an older lady who went there, and
I'll tell you, if I had time, I would read the opening salvo, the first 2 paragraphs, because it's poetry, it's judicial poetry, basically mocking her claim that she didn't know she was not entitled to enter the Capitol that day.
I mean, I think people forget that it was like height of COVID. You weren't entitled to go anywhere. Like
for 2 years, the Capitol was closed to visitors, Pete.
Yeah. Wow. Deneen McAndrew is in some real trouble. And so she was like, you were there for 2 different trials today. You're watching a lot of media, I'm guessing, still covering all of these. I mean, you go, and we're glad that you do. And you report about them, you cover them on your YouTube channel and everywhere else on MSNBC and Twitter and so on. But everybody's still covering these. It's important, right? There's still a lot more to come.
Yes and no, I will say, Pete. There was wall-to-wall coverage of the first Oath Keepers seditious conspiracy trial. Cameras were set up. I was running back and forth between the courtroom and the cameras to do updates on MSNBC. Interest has waned. Coverage has waned. If you walk into the media room, it is probably half as full as it was for the first seditious conspiracy trial.
Do you think that's because of the level of the notoriety of that defendant was Stuart Rhodes, who is, everybody knows a little bit about him? Or is it that this interest from media, from the public, is waning as a result of any number of things, I suppose?
Yeah, I think it's a couple of things. I think Enrique Tarrio, the leader of the Proud Boys, who is one of the defendants on trial right now, is as notorious and perhaps was even better known than what's his name with the patch?
Stuart Rhodes.
Elmer.
Oh,
Stuart
my
Rhodes.
God. Yeah, that's right. Elmer is his real name.
So, no, I think I think the Proud Boys are actually a somewhat more notorious group than the Oath Keepers in some ways. I think once you have a seditious conspiracy conviction, these are very long, drawn-out trials. A lot of it is like watching paint dry. I think the media is now on to a non-story like Joe Biden's classified documents, and they're all consumed with that. And the real story is that, American citizens continue to be tried for seditious conspiracy for following Donald Trump's orders to try to stop the certification of Joe Biden's win. That is actually a more important story.
Is there anywhere to follow or know how many more defendants, how many more people there have been brought up on charges who are awaiting trial, in trial? I mean, is there anybody that is, and by the way, there's still, I guess, a lot of people that haven't even, maybe not a lot, but haven't been identified from videos of January 6th. There's still others out there that could be found, I suppose, and arrested, right?
There absolutely are. There's some good compilations. I can't think of precisely who puts them out, but there are good compilations about how many arrests have been made. It's about 1,000, approaching 1,000. How many trials have been held? I think there have been 500 guilty pleas, but they're still looking to arrest a whole bunch more people. And there are lots of trials in the queue that will be coming up regularly. I mean, nobody really heard about what's her name? Deanne McAndrew.
Right.
Didn't pay much attention to her crimes until we got this opinion today from Judge Cole Arcatelli. So but there are some really good comprehensive lists that have been put out by both journalists. And you can even go to some of the DOJ press releases where they summarize all of the cases that are pending.
Speaking of the DOJ, it took Merrick Garland very short amount of time to assign a special prosecutor to investigate the Biden classified files that were found. Took a lot longer for Special Prosecutor Jack Smith to be appointed. That's one issue that some people are having. Regardless, what are your thoughts on this latest development? They keep finding more documents that are at either Biden's house or his former office. And I've heard a lot about it. I mean, it's a pretty important story, but it's hard to. There's not a lot of nuance left, Glenn. So people are just making it seem like, it's the same thing as Trump, which obviously it's different. You must have some thoughts on this, I know.
Yeah, there are some superficial similarities that I think make it easy for people to feel like they know what's going on. This guy had some documents he shouldn't have had, and that guy had some documents he shouldn't have had. So, but that's where the similarities end. And let me start with the appointment of special counsel, and then let's talk about the substance of it and why there is absolutely no comparison between these two situations. So I understand why people are concerned about the fact that it took Merrick Garland about a year and a half to get around to a special counsel for Donald Trump, and then he finally appointed Jack Smith, and he basically appointed a special counsel for Joe Biden in about the time it took for him to sneeze, right? It's like, special counsel. All right. Thank you. I'll be here all night. So, but here is why I actually think these are justified decisions. I have another big beef with Merrick Garland and the pace he has set, but I'll get to that in a minute. Until Donald Trump announced that he was a candidate for the presidency, he was not Joe Biden's opponent in anything. So Merrick Garland and Merrick Garland's Department of Justice could investigate him because he wasn't running against Merrick Garland's boss. The minute he announced he was now Joe Biden's only opponent, Joe Biden is the guy that hired and can fire Merrick Garland. So Merrick Garland is like, okay, I can't do this now. I have to assign a special counsel. That makes sense to me. My beef with Merrick Garland is that I don't know what the heck he was doing for 18 months. I know they were doing a lot of work behind the scenes, but before he appointed special counsel, he was not setting the pace that needed to be set in these urgent times for our democracy. And that was driven home to me, Pete, a couple of days ago when Carol Leonnig from the Washington Post broke the story that in early December, now remember Jack Smith was appointed November 18th. In early December, Jack Smith carpet bombs people with grand jury subpoenas covering a dozen different categories of evidence and information, which is great and is perfect investigative work, but it should have been done a year and a half ago. Why did it take the appointment of special counsel to do it? That's my beef with Merrick Garland, not him taking so long to appoint Jack Smith. Let's compare that to the instant appointment for Joe Biden. I also happen to think that is a justifiable decision, albeit a discretionary decision. He didn't have to do it by law, but he applied the principles of the special counsel statute and the rules and regulations of the Department of Justice, and he decided it was the right thing to do. I also have a beef with the way he went about it, because what he did was he first said, I'm going to assign a U.S. attorney from Chicago to do a preliminary review to give me advice on whether there's any there and whether there needs to be a special counsel appointed. Who did Merrick Garland pick to do that preliminary review? One of only two Donald Trump appointed U.S. attorneys left on the planet. There are 93 U.S. attorneys. Only two remain that were appointed by Trump. Why did Merrick Garland pick a Trump appointee? I know why he thinks he did it, because he wanted to seem fair and even-handed. And look, everybody will join hands and sing Kumbaya and conclude that it was a fair, impartial, apolitical decision if I put it in the hands of a Trump official. I think there's more downside to upside than that, because you're never going to get a Republican to sing Kumbaya and say the Department of Justice is acting fairly and apolitically by looking into Donald Trump. So, but anyway, he asks this guy, John Lausch, this Trump-appointed U.S. attorney in Chicago, who's on his way. He's got one foot out the door of government, federal service. And John Lausch says, hey, I think there's some there, and I think you ought to appoint a special counsel. Merrick Garland at that point had boxed himself in, because you can't then say, I don't care what you say, U.S. attorney, that I asked for your recommendation. I'm going to go against it, and I'm going to say no, special counsel. That would involve an uproar from both the right and the left. And people like me who actually care about the integrity and legitimacy of the Department of Justice. But then what does he do? He finds another Donald Trump official, special counsel Robert Hur, who wasn't just any old Donald Trump official. He was under the wing of Rod Rosenstein, the guy who stood behind Bill Barr and literally and figuratively propped up Bill Barr's lies about the Mueller report. Again, why, Attorney General Garland, do you have to put another Trump official in charge of this? Can't you get somebody who's untainted by the Trump years? Yeah. But no. So the timing and the decision to do it, I can explain away. But the choice, I have a hard time with.
It's this appearance of fairness that the idea that somehow Republicans, conservatives, pundits care about. They don't. They're going to say that they're all Democrats, even if they're not. Or, Trump is going to, in his stupid transmissions on his, as you called it in one of your videos, third-rate social media platforms. Robert Hur, it doesn't matter. They'd still say he's some Democratic hack, even though he's a Trump appointee who apparently, when he was former United States Attorney for District of Maryland, only prosecuted Democrats. Granted, there's a lot of Democrats down there, but still, there's a lot of statewide Republicans, too. I read that today as well. So we'll see what Robert Hur turns up on Biden's classified documents. But a lot of people are saying it'll probably be nothing, and it gives the Attorney General and Department of Justice and Special Counsel a lot more credibility to actually indict Donald Trump for those classified documents. Do you agree with that analysis, or do you have?
I do agree with that analysis. Thinking people will reach that conclusion. So, and on the substance of these two things, Pete, I mean, night and day, right? Yeah. Joe Biden, his team finds some documents he shouldn't have had. I'd love to know why all of a sudden that happened. It smells a little funny to me, the timing of it, but okay, let's let the investigation play out. And what does he do? Well, he causes a search to be made of other areas where there might be documents that shouldn't be in his possession. He alerts the National Archives. He alerts the Department of Justice. He turns everything over. They fully cooperate. And that's that. We'll see what the investigation reveals. Donald Trump, at this moment, Pete, Donald Trump is still in court, litigating in front of Chief Judge Beryl Howell, resisting prosecutors' demands to certify he's turned over all the documents he stole. And Joe Biden, on his own, basically found everything, gave it all over, and said, how can I help? I mean, come on, talk about night and day. And importantly, Donald Trump obstructed justice by violating a grand jury subpoena, which was issued as part of a criminal investigation, directing him to give over all the documents. He said, I'm not going to do it. That's obstruction of justice. These two incidents are so dramatically different, but I think the nuances will be lost on a lot of people.
Yeah, well, nuance is tough to get across to the American public, to the public in general. Last thing I want to ask you about, legal issue I want to ask you about it. What about Georgia? A lot of people are talking about what's going on in Georgia. What is this case exactly? This is where he asked for, give me a break. Just give me, I only need like 12,000 votes here. This is that case where he was talking to the Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger, who's now famous and never thought anybody would know his name. We all know his name. And then the Georgia Attorney General has the jurisdiction to investigate this, I guess. And a lot of people are saying that's the one that's timeline wise is probably going to wrap up soon. Or I guess the investigation is wrapped up. Well, give me the update. Fill in my blanks.
Yep. So here's where the prosecutor is Fulton County District Attorney Fani Willis, who, by all accounts, is a very serious, very determined prosecutor. What I love about her is she has quietly defeated all of the scared little boys who didn't want to testify before the grand jury about Donald Trump's crimes. I mean, she defeated the littlest general, Mike Flynn. He desperately didn't want to testify, ran to court. Please don't make me. She beat him. She defeated the littlest mayor, Rudy Giuliani, who desperately didn't want to testify, ran to court. Please don't make me. She defeated him. He went into the grand jury, and she defeated the littlest senator, Lindsey Graham, who scurried all the way up to the United States Supreme Court. Please don't make me testify about Donald Trump's crimes. And she beat the pants off all three of those.
And when
boys.
Lindsey Graham showed up to testify in his own defense, is this true? He showed up in a small shopping cart, like one of those baby ones that they let the kids push. Is that right? That's the report. I saw that on PBS.
Maybe, and they got him a gumball out of the machine when he was done. Maybe, I don't know.
They got him a trinket out of the trinket machine. He was like, "Oh, thank you so much, everybody. I told the Georgia people." So what's going to? Okay, so this.
So let me. I'll keep going through where we are, because she defeated everybody, and they all went. And Brad Raffensperger testified about Donald Trump's crimes. That phone call where he said, "I was being threatened with prosecution. I felt pressured. Are you kidding me?" So she has amassed some really serious evidence of what happened in Georgia. That was all before a special grand jury. Georgia has this strange 2 grand jury system. That was a special grand jury put in place to compel witnesses to testify who didn't want to come in and testify. Regular grand juries can't do that in Georgia, only special grand juries. And when they complete their work, they issue a report it's under seal. It goes to the prosecutor, and it is the grand jury's recommendation about whether crimes were committed, if so, by who, and what charges should be indicted. That report goes back to the regular grand jury with the power to indict. That's where we are. We're slow walking the report, and it looks like it'll be presented on January 24th to the regular grand jury. And at that point, I suspect if the report says we found enough evidence to indict people, Fani Willis will ask the regular grand jury to indict Trump and company. That is my hope. Based on the public reporting, I think that is beyond a hope. It's an expectation based on what we know.
Indict him for what? And company for what?
So I think if you look at the Brookings Institute report, they beautifully documented all of the violations of Georgia state election laws that were committed by Trump and company. One of the big ones, one of the easiest ones, is soliciting election fraud, which is a crime under the Georgia state laws. And when you say to the Secretary of State, just find me 11,780 votes, because that's how many I need to be corruptly declared the winner. That would constitute soliciting election fraud. That is one of, I think, 17 crimes that have been documented as at least being supported by what we know from the public reporting.
There's so many crimes, so much criming, so much more to talk about, but I will let you go. I really appreciate all of this updates and information, and everybody can learn more, of course, on your YouTube channel, which is all plugged and connected in the show notes. One of your listeners got you a baseball bat. Dude, this is so nice.
Yeah, they sent me a dozen Justice Matters bats.
A bunch of them.
Custom made. Wow. And so the best corny line I could think of was, Justice better hit one out of the park soon. Very, very cool. They make major league bats. So these things are the real deal.
What are you going to do with all those bats? You should I don't know.
I give them, this is the second batch they send me. I give them away to people who, support the cause and
I love it. Well, I want a bat.
Next time you're down here, I'll sell you one cheap.
I want a Justice Matters bat. I'll pay high. I'll pay top dollar.
You got it. Give me your address. I'll stick it in the mail.
All right, buddy. Keep up the good work. Thank you very much for talking to me. Always, always awesome.
Good talking to you, Pete.
All right, there he goes, Glenn Kirschner. Everybody, check him out on the YouTube. Check him out on the Patreon. Check him out on Twitter, and all the links to Glenn and all of his work in today's and everyday's show notes to learn more about my guests. And of course, thank you to Aaron Carroll, Go check him out. Go read his New York Times column. Subscribe to Healthcare Triage, the YouTube channel. And that's it. That's all. Thank you to John Carroll and Pete Coe, longtime listeners and contributors to the show. Of course, my intern is Odessa San at the University of Wisconsin Whitewater. She's doing great work. But mostly, thank you to everybody who supports this podcast with a paid subscription. Those of you who edit your subscription up, a couple of those happened yesterday. New subscribers, welcome to the party. Welcome to our community. Join the Discord platform and join us on Thursday nights at the Stand Up Happy Hour Hangout, which I always look forward to each and every Thursday. You can hang out with over 50 listeners usually, hanging out, shooting the shit, having drinks, having fun, having laughs, telling stories. Always great. Be a part of our community. Support this daily podcast. It's free, but it isn't cheap. I need your paid subscription. Sign up now. Patreon.com/Pete Dominic or standuppete.com. That's it. That's all. Zip it up. Zip it out. John Carroll, take it away.
Off of your fence, even if it ain't a very friendly audience, well, they'll begin to listen when you start making sense and you stand up, stand up. No need to point your rifle to defend your town, just stand up, stand up. You know they can't deny you what you're laying down, boy, you better stand up, stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. She's the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up, stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up, they had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. Alright, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go, and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. Alright, we got to speak up, we got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand up, stand up. Got to stand up. Ooh, come on, just stand up. Everybody got to stand up in the darkest hour. Stand up. People got the power. Stand up. Come on, come on, come on. Come on, come on, come on. Come on, come on, come on.